Welcome to Sunday morning at First Presbyterian Church. I'm Pastor Dieth, and in response to the events of the amazing resurrection at Easter, it now becomes our job to discern how we respond to the events of Holy Week and Christ being raised from the dead. We are to discern how we are being led to live, to change our lives, to care for others, to welcome others to Christ's table. This is our call and our challenge. Let's do this together. Come on in.
Our first reading today comes from 1 Samuel 3, 1-3. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. At the time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down within the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Our second lesson is continuing on the 1 Samuel story. We're continuing on 1 Samuel 3, 4-10. Listen for the word of the Lord. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am, and ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But Eli said, I did not call, lie down again. So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, Samuel. Samuel got up, went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call, my son, lay down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time. And he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, this being Father's Day, me being both a father and a preacher, I would be remiss if I didn't share some corny dad jokes. They might revoke both my dad card and my preacher card if on this day I did not celebrate some jokes. So I'll go pretty quick. Here we go. What did the puppies make their dad for Father's Day breakfast? Poached eggs. Why did the Bean children give their dad a sweater for Father's Day? He was chilly. My father spilled invisible ink all over himself. He's at the hospital waiting to be seen. Thank you, choir. For Father's Day, my dad asked for a gift with no strings attached, so I bought him a broken guitar. What did the papa cow say to the baby cow? It's past your bedtime. Pasture. I need a trap setter. What do lobsters do on Father's Day? They celebrate their dads. What did the rainbow say to his son after the thunderstorm? I'm proud of Hugh. What do you call a misleading commercial about Father's Day? False dadvertising. Two more. Why do you call a collective force of Army Rangers on Father's Day? Special Pops. And finally, why did the bald dad use his credit card at the wig shop? To pay. Oh no. You do not want to encourage that, I'm telling you. So yes, we are celebrating our dads today, and this story which we know fairly well. You heard it from Beth, and we have heard it this morning. And there's a very real dad role here in the story. So let's go back and set the context here. We are in 1 Samuel, so we're roughly 1000 BCE-ish. It is before Saul becomes king. It is before David becomes king. It is ending the time of judges, which were the leaders at that time. There was no monarchy. There were no kings of Israel just yet. Judges were that role, and there were priests, and they were in a city called Shiloh. That was in Samaria. Later, the Samaritans and the Israelites will fight and separate and not like each other, making all of Jesus' parables, the Samaritan woman at the well, the Good Samaritan, it will stand out even more so because they are roughly enemies at that point, but not yet. Here they are still united. In Samaria, in Shiloh, there is a worship site, and it's the capital of Israel at this point. And the temple had not yet been built. Who builds the first one? Do you remember? Solomon, I heard it. Yes. And first we have to get to Saul to be king, and then we have David. David is the father of Solomon, and so that's a little bit down the line. So there's not even a full temple structure. It is what they call the tabernacle, which is kind of a big tent where the Ark of the Covenant, Indiana Jones fans, on a Dad Sunday, so we can talk about that, is there in the middle representing God and God's presence. Where that ark was is where God was, in that tabernacle. And the priests were chosen to administrate worship, to keep the site holy, to take care of all of those things that priests did, and that was Eli. So you have Eli, and he is older. His sight is failing him. He is nearing the end of his life. He has two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Just fun to say. Hophni and Phinehas. Phinehas and Fur, but Hophni and Phinehas. And both of them die because they are bad sons and they do bad things in their role as the next generation of priests. So they will die later on. So you have Eli, and let's go back to Hannah. Hannah was not able to conceive on her own, and she prayed mightily before God. And she made a promise that if God would allow her to conceive and bear a child, she would dedicate that child, set that child apart at the temple for the temple, in essence, dedicating this child to be a priest, one for God who would live and dwell there. Well, that happened. And so she was granted and blessed with that child, and that child was Samuel. And so so Samuel now is a child. Hannah was living up to her portion after the child was born, dedicated and really gave Samuel to the temple. And so now under the tutelage of Eli, the master aging priest, and the passage here says Samuel did not yet know the Lord. Scripture was not yet open to him. And so there they are. And interestingly enough, Samuel is right by the ark, where his bed is set up, where he is napping, where he is resting. Eli is laying down in another portion of that tabernacle. And the voice comes, Samuel, Samuel. Nobody else in here. It's got to be Eli. 3 times we see this happen. First 2 times, Eli probably annoyed. I didn't say a word. Let me sleep. Let an old man sleep. Went back and back and back. And finally, it says Eli perceived. Little light bulb inspiration there. He got it. He understood this could be God talking and calling to Samuel. And so he says, the next time, say, speak, for your servant is listening. And a 4th time, God calls. Samuel goes. and says, "Speak, your servant is listening." And this is the context for our story today. First, it's interesting, the passage started with the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. It's an interesting statement, isn't it? The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not yet widespread. So people were not having the kind of visions that those prior to this time have been chronicled through our Old Testament record. The word of the Lord was rare. So do you think God had stepped away from them? I don't know. Do you feel like that maybe now? Sometimes I feel like that. How many had visions in the last week of God speaking to them directly? You wouldn't tell me if you did. I'm amazed at the places that in the churches I have served, that there have been a handful in each place that have come to me and say, "Don't tell anybody this. I'm never going to share this, nor have I, but I want to tell you, I had an encounter with God. I heard God speak to me, or I saw Christ, a physical presence." And they think they are too crazy, or people would look and judge them. And so they keep it to themselves. What a shame. What a shame. And I wonder if at that time and in this time, it is hard for me to believe that God stepped away from them, but rather that other things had stepped into their lives, into their heads, into their hearts, that kept them from seeing, from hearing, from feeling, from noticing, from perceiving, as Eli did, that God was present among them in some way. And if they had trouble then, we've got to have so much more now. With all of the chatter, all of the clickety-clack in our heads, from social media to music available all around us all the time, news, people, everything that swirls around us, they had a hard time then. I think it's a challenge for us now. I don't think God was less present then or now. I think it's that much harder. Where were Eli and Samuel? Number one, where were they? Yeah, they're tabernacle. They were at church for them. And what were they doing? Were they doing crossword puzzles? Were they out in the back pressing olive oil? I don't know what they did. Playing games? No, they were laying down in the temple. There were no other voices. There were no other sounds. And they were in close proximity to God when they heard. I think it's so important for us, and this is nothing new, and yet it's one of our biggest challenges. We talk often about all the voices in our world that compete for attention in our heads, in our hearts, in our souls. We talk all about how rare it is to find a time of quiet and silence. TVs in the bedroom, stereos, phones in the car, everywhere we go, we can have voices in our ears. You see folks walking around with the earbuds in, knowing they're listening to something, sometimes talking to people. We'll do pet peeves another time. How in the world can we expect to hear God's voice in a way that even resembles or even in the neighborhood of Samuel? We're afraid of silence. We're afraid of quiet because sometimes we don't want to face what's there in the quiet. Sometimes that's us. Sometimes it's those things that we know we need to process and think about, but we don't want to process and think about. this week at Montreat. Our amazing young people, and they were that. In some of the time of sharing, one of the things that blew me away that I hadn't heard before was several of the youth vocalizing that Montreat for them is the only time in their year where they are able to face and address difficult things in their lives that they can't the rest of the year because they won't take the time to face it, or they are able to fully distract themselves on a regular basis so they don't have to. And not that Montreat is quiet, but it's separate. It's a retreat setting. It's a focus on God. In essence, we are in that tabernacle once you go through those gates, and there's a different sense of being in God's presence in that place. And for them to be able to articulate that they know they have things that they have to face and work on, and that this is really the main time to do that, I think speaks volumes for where our youth are and their understanding of God themselves in the world. Another reason Montreat is so important for them and also for us. You know it in a relationship, significant relationships, when you're at odds with each other, you have to find time to get to some of that hard stuff. Don't want to sit down and do it. Don't want to shut everything down and say, let's talk about this. But you know you have to. Because that's how relationships are kept. It's how relationships continue to move forward. It's how relationships seek to stay healthy. You get the courage enough, and we are mature enough to face those difficult things in relationships and in ourselves. And so easy, friends, as our youth said. It's that 1 week out of a year where they felt like they can shut off everything and face what they need to in a safe, supportive environment. We need to do that as well. Shut the rest of the world down. Doesn't have to be at a retreat, but it could be. We need to find ways of having a little bit of Sabbath every day. Sometimes that's a devotion, but sometimes it takes more than that. It takes some quiet. And that doesn't mean you have to talk the whole time. Our understanding of prayer is not necessarily just about words. It is about being in God's presence and opening yourself to God's Spirit. That doesn't have to be words. That can be feelings, a sensation, a visualization of opening yourself so God's Spirit can come into you. That is prayer. And as we learned last week as well, if you are angry about some of those difficult things, you go to God in prayer and you scream at God. God can handle it, and that is prayer just as much as our thanksgivings are. Read the Psalms. It is full of people screaming at God, asking questions. Where are you? What are you doing? I need you. I'm sinking. I'm dying. I'm overrun. Where are you? That is effective prayer because it's honest. It is opening your heart and your life to God. And there's so much we're missing when we play the distraction game. And it's hard. I know it. I fight it every day myself. But they are undisturbed. They are laying down. This is endorsement of naps as I see it. And the word comes. Now, what did Samuel need to understand that this was the word of the Lord? Eli. Right. Eli is in the mentor role, someone who has been there, someone who has heard and been with and seen and felt and been in God's presence and knows what that looks like, what that sounds like, what that feels like. It takes a couple of times, but Eli gets it. It's God. It's God calling you. When you think in your life how you came to Christianity, my guess is for many, not all, but for many it had to do with other people that started you on that journey. Somebody was an Eli for you. Maybe it was a parent or a grandparent. Maybe it was a friend that invited you to youth group. Maybe it was being new in a new town and your neighbor said, hey, we're having a Bible study, why don't you come? Hey, we're serving at the homeless shelter, why don't you come and join us? Mentors in faith are so important. And again, I believe many of us can track our faith through those who came before us and helped us to see, just as Eli did to Samuel, that God is present, God is speaking to us, and how are we going to respond? And it's not just that we need to remember those people, and I would say thank them. If they are alive and you know who they are, thank them for being a mentor for you. Thank them for being Eli to your Samuel. People who help you see and understand God, it's so important to thank them. The people in your life, in whatever context, your work setting, your home setting, your church setting, just let them know it's always a special and a beautiful thing to realize that you meant something to someone that was so important and profound. So who is your Eli? And the next question is, whose Eli are you? Again, more likely than not, someone brought you into faith. Who's coming up behind you? Who's coming up with you? And it's not all old and young. Often the young help us older to see God in new and different ways. But who are we trying to help see that God is present with them and in their lives? We need to find those people as well. Who can you help? Look around this room. It is filled with beautiful, faithful people. How can we help each other in this vein? You have both been an Eli to me as individuals in a congregation, and I hope I have been some Eli to you. How can we do that more on a basis where we're looking at each other and we kind of look and say, you know what, I think I can help that person. Why don't we get together, have a cup of coffee, go to dinner, go axe throwing together, whatever it would take to have a conversation about faith, about God, about how you might see that God is calling someone else in their life. Because often they don't see it. Eli didn't. Samuel didn't. If Eli wasn't there, Samuel may not have come in the way that he did. If someone wasn't there for you in the way that they were, would you even be here? I hope so, but it would be a different way, and that person was sent to you to help you the way that you have been called to help others. That's a part of the joy of being in a church family, is that we can look around and we can say, we are here to learn from each other, to follow, to teach, to learn, to be both Samuel and Eli at different times to different people. So I want you to think about that. Who mentors us and who can we mentor? That is a beautiful part of a church family. Let's focus on that. So being able to hear the call is key first, and that's some of our own individual stuff. We need to beat back the world enough to allow God to come in. I promise you, God is with you every day, seeking to speak and communicate with you, maybe not in visions where there's no doubt there, maybe not in clear, audible words, but maybe. Maybe it is the conversation you have with a coworker. Maybe it is a conversation you have with a friend or a family member or a church member or something you see as you drive through the city. Maybe something you hear on your radio, maybe something you read. Because even though all those voices are there, God is seeking to work through all of those so that you know that you are called, you are special, and you are loved. And that too is a joy of being a follower of Jesus Christ and part of a church family. So today I want you to think again. Many times this has been our fathers as we celebrate on Father's Day, our mentors, those who help to teach and raise and guide us. But it's not just our wonderful dads. It can be anybody that takes an interest in you. Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was a neighbor. And now we too are being called to mentor others and point and say, that's God talking to you. A part of the call process for ministry is that you have to have affirmation from the community. Meaning I can say, I feel like I'm called to serve in that capacity, maybe go to seminary, be ordained, but others have to see that in you and say, I see those gifts in you. That's the Eli to our Samuel. So today, friends, again, take these two things. Beat back the world enough to leave some time of quiet so that you can hear God's voice. That is not a new message, but when we all do it, I'll stop saying it. And second, who was your Eli? Thank them. And whose Eli can you be? And if you can't think of anybody, find somebody. Here or in the community, your family, friends, those in your life. What a blessing and a joy it is to be a part of this Christian family. So let's go and do and be as we are called. God is calling. You. How will we respond? Amen.